He's not the one.
Harmony, one has escaped!
Joe Davidson co-directs, co-writes, produces and stars in Sorority of the Damned, that also stars Felissa Rose. This is a kind of low-budget, Buffy-esque style kind of horror comedy, and the setup is there is a sorority of kind of teenage girls, and they discover through the help of this kind of handyman a kind of hidden room within their kind of building that looks like it's kind of decked out to worship the occult. They presume that it's the kind of the original sorority kind of pledging halls and all the rest of it, and there's like a book there. But it turns out that this is actually a kind of a summoning means for these kind of ancient demonic witches. And these witches are now summoned and take over the body of these kind of sorority sisters, and it's now up to this handyman to try and stop them. So let's talk about it. What do I think works in this movie's favour? I will say I think the end of this movie, it finishes relatively strong. Now, we get most of the kind of the more overt VFX in the kind of the final act of the movie, and we get this big kind of like fight between these four kind of more elaborate witches, the kind of the true forms, if you like, versus our handyman and a kind of golem, this kind of statue that kind of comes alive. And you know, I could have quite liked the somewhat rubbery but kind of quite fun VFX and these practical suits and stuff like that. And yeah, we get a kind of quite long extended kind of smackdown between our protagonists and these kind of four witches, of which I've got to say I think the movie, you know, at least ended on somewhat of a little bit of a high. And the practical VFX, I mean, it's not the kind of the best, but it's fun if you don't mind kind of B-movie kind of standards here. The movie has this kind of lighter tone and almost has shades of the kind of like the sex comedies from like the 80s to a degree, not to maybe the level of those films, but you know, you can kind of see the influence of those type of movies in this one, that kind of like pre-American Pie, Revenge of the Nerds kind of style movies, in a way, with the kind of some of the gags here and the kind of the sexual innuendos and the like. It doesn't go quite as hard as those movies did, but like I said, there's some similarities, I suppose. And if you like a kind of like a goofy comedic romp, then you may well kind of like this one. It's nice to see kind of Felissa Rose as our sort of house mother, the kind of the person really who knows what's going on in regards to these witches and stuff. And she's at the best where she's always screaming, and she does plenty of that. So I could have quite liked Felissa Rose, albeit she's not doesn't have a huge presence in the movie. To be honest with you, she's not in all of it. There's kind of lots of pretty girls. There's some of them get kind of like semi-naked, and they're kind of quite fun characters to a degree. However, let's transition to what doesn't work. Fun characters. Now, I've mentioned we have a one person that's kind of behind this, the co-director, writer, producer, and star, and he's kind of inserted himself in as the main character in this movie, and he's clearly trying to emulate a kind of Ash Williams from the Evil Dead style, kind of like everyman hero, but he's lacking the charisma, I would say, of Bruce Campbell, for example. I did not find his character particularly funny, particularly kind of endearing or likeable, and it almost feels like it's a little bit too much of a try-hard. I would have maybe suggested not casting himself in the kind of the main role, and maybe cast maybe more of an established actor or someone with a little bit more kind of screen presence ultimately. Maybe stick to the directing, writing, producing and the rest of it. I think, you know, maybe it smacks of a little bit of hubris here, I have to say. But, yeah, I didn't find his character particularly interesting. And I would go so far as to say, as it's a little weird almost, how this kind of like middle-aged handyman is seemingly always hanging around in this sorority house with these kind of teenage girls, never really seeming to mind that much in, you know, in this kind of story when... You know, I know this is not trying to be a realistic movie or anything, but it just seems like this seems like the movie that he wants to put out there, rather than, I think, anything like, if there was a guy like this hanging around this sorority, like a sorority this much, he would be called a creep and things like this. But that's never sort of ever in the movie or anything like that. But it just seems a little weird, to be honest, how this kind of like the status quo is kind of ending up. This handyman just seeming always hanging around this sorority. And they make a joke about how they keep flushing tampons down the loo and stuff, but even so, it's just a little bit sort of, you know, odd. I'll just say that. But, you know, as I say, the character, I think, is misjudged and not as charismatic as I think he thinks he is, at least in my opinion at the very least. The ending is fun, but I feel like the movie up until that point is less so. It's just kind of like somewhat of a weak script with really not that of interesting things kind of going on until we get to the kind of the end, to be honest. And although this movie has a couple of like, I guess, cute moments here and there, you know, the 2/3 of this movie, I've got to say, is it just seems like a kind of like, the sort of thing that you would see on TV, very low budget kind of TV, and just it's not very entertaining ultimately. It just seems cheap, trashy, and kind of like poorly put together. The ending, you know, makes it will give this a mark higher than I would have otherwise given this, I will say. But even with the ending, which I think is the strongest part of this movie, I still think it's a little bit of a weaker movie overall. So I'm going to give it a below average, but not terrible, 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.